Vancouver has a problem, hemmed in by water, mountains, agricultural land, the border, and the Port of Vancouver. Industrial land is severely squeezed. Virtually no one is paying attention because industrial employment land isn't sexy. It doesn't capture headlines nor votes, and it's complicated. Metro Vancouver is endeavoring to develop a plan, but with 21 different city and municipal governments, all with different agendas, addressing the many issues collectively is next to impossible. It's an important issue because without industrial lands that are available, affordable, and adaptable to the changing needs of businesses of all sizes, the consequences will be felt on the roads, in the community, in the environment, and in the economy. As with residential and commercial property, the inspiration to come up with innovative solutions is dumped onto developers who have to weave their way through an increasingly complex set of rules, regulations, and processes. Many of the design rules are set in the past and don't take into account the need to build sites that go skyward and include some commercial office space. It is projected that within the next 4 to 5 years, the Lower Mainland will simply run out of industrial lands. And now you may ask yourself, why should I care? Well, the answer is you don't have to, and most people dismiss it as a minor issue. But Eric Aderneck, an expert in industrial and employment land use, is paying close attention. And he says, well, it may not be sexy. It's important to pay attention to because there will be opportunity costs that are lost. Businesses that may want to expand can't, and so they leave. And larger international organizations that may want to come to Vancouver don't because there isn't available space. We invited Eric Aderneck to join us for a conversation that matters about our need to think in innovative ways about the region's industrial lands.
Conversations That Matter is a partner program of the Centre for Dialogue at Simon Fraser University. The production of this program is made possible thanks to the following and viewers like you. Please become a patron at conversationsthatmatter.tv.
Welcome. We're talking about a rather interesting issue today, and it's something that isn't probably high on most people's priority list, and that's industrial employment lands. Let's start with a definition of what that is, because somebody will go, excuse me, what?
Sure, I'm always happy to talk about industrial lands, and I think it's important to recognize it's a long spectrum or wide spectrum.
Okay.
We have everything from production, distribution, repair, local serving type of industrial and businesses that serve the local population, and there's a lot of jobs associated with that.
Are you talking like things like body shops and small warehouses and things like that?
Small warehouses, some of them are high tech, some of them are limited or very high value manufacturing, and different types of things that are innovative as well. Mm-hmm. And that's the smaller type of, some cases, urban industrial. And then you go to the other end of the spectrum where we're talking about large warehouses, 400,000 square feet. They need a very large site. They need to be by a highway. That might be associated with distribution, import, export. Some of it's linked to rail and trade and transportation and the port as well. So very wide spectrum. So when we say industrial, it can mean a lot of things.
So does that also mean large-scale manufacturing?
So those would be all industrial, yes. I can't say we have a lot of large-scale manufacturing in the region.
Right.
But we certainly do have some things that do take up a lot of space, and I think it's important to recognize they need a home as well. Like, for example, there used to be a fair number of mills and other large industrial using sites in Metro Vancouver. That's in decline just because of the economy and other things. They might be locating to other parts of British Columbia, for example.
Because the cost of and the ability to be able to create that kind of economic engine that they were at the time gets harder and harder here in the Lower Mainland. There isn't the space.
Those sectors might be changing and some of them in decline, and it makes sense to be closer to other sources. For example, if it's lumber, then be closer to that in terms of lumber mill, but that sector is also changing as well.
I was reading something on the weekend that said that in the next 4 or 5 years, we may run out of available new industrial lands. Is that accurate?
I would say we're certainly running out of it already. So if we look at some of the information we have, in 2015 there was a Metro Vancouver industrial land inventory. It identified about 28,000 acres of land that was industrial of various sorts. About 20% of that was vacant. So that was 4.5 years ago. So certainly the amount of land that's vacant has substantially changed and probably declined. And a lot of those lands were a variety of different uses on them already. Some of them located in good locations, some of them not. So there's very much site limitations or transportation limitations that mean of that inventory that's vacant, it can't automatically be used. Right now, we have, according to the latest brokerage reports, we have about 210 million square feet of industrial building space in the region and about 6 million square feet under construction right now to meet demand. But even with that, the vacancy rate's still only about 1.5%, and rents for a lot of the tenants are going up quite a bit.
And it's important that those rents be affordable, particularly for those kinds of industries that need to utilize that.
For sure. And
Yeah.
in the last 4 or 5 years, the rents that some of the businesses, small and big, have been experiencing have gone up significantly. When their leases come up for renewal, usually every 5 years, they're in for a 40 or 50% increase in their rent, plus property taxes are going up too.
Right, because they're seeing the same pressure that other commercial real estate is now under as far as those tax increases. Do we have any idea how many people in the region are employed in the businesses that are, operating in industrial lands?
According to the information we have, it's about a quarter of the entire workforce in the region is on industrial lands. And in the last few years, that ratio has actually increased. So that's a lot of jobs that's happening in industrial lands. A lot of them pay, actually, the salary is quite a bit higher than the average service job. So that's important to realize as well. And although industrial lands, as you mentioned in your opening statement, don't always get a lot of attention, they're not sexy, let's say, they do house a lot of services, a lot of jobs, and they're part of a complete community. So if we want to have a society or a community where there's jobs, live, work, and play, as the slogan goes, all within an area, it's important to have industrial jobs there and also have jobs close to housing in some cases so that the transportation is done in as efficient manner as possible.
So I got to get you to hang on for a second while we take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. Conversations That Matter is brought to you by Odlum Brown, a client-focused investment firm that starts client relationships with straightforward conversations focused on you, your aspirations, and your investment priorities. Odlum Brown has been a supporter of Conversations That Matter from the day we started this show. Their only condition was that we provide a non-biased conversation with people from all sides of all sorts of issues. And of course, we couldn't produce this show without the support of Oh Boy Productions. If you're looking to produce a show like this one, I suggest you reach out to Oh Boy. They can help you produce it, and they can help you build your audience. And we also need your support. I ask you to please pledge $1 per show by going to conversationsthatmatter.tv/donate, because those dollars add up and play an important role in helping us produce this show. Now, back to the show. So is the Greater Vancouver Fraser Valley area unique in the sense that, it's hemmed in? We can't just say, okay, well, we're going to expand out further, like Calgary could, for instance.
So it is in that regard. So if you look at other cities where they have a limited amount of land, strong demand, whether it's in Asia, Hong Kong, Singapore, Tokyo, which are somewhat extreme examples, or perhaps more locally, Seattle's experimenting with multi-level industrial developments, San Francisco, New York, New Jersey, for example, where industrial land is very much in demand. Businesses want an urban space, and the type of industry is changing over time. So what you see happening is buildings are building up. So we say, well, you want an urban industrial location, the rent's going to be higher, but you're going to be close to the customers and your suppliers and your workforce. But in exchange for that, you're going to be in a multi-level building rather than perhaps the historic preference to be in a one-level building.
Okay, so that has been the historical preference, one-level building.
Yes.
And you take a look at a number of the jurisdictions that are throughout the Lower Mainland, they still appear to me to be kind of locked into that concept. How important is it, because we're constrained, that we now start looking at going upwards?
I think that's where the opportunity is. So if we look at residential market, we can see people aren't building as many houses as they used to. We're using the land more efficiently, townhouses or apartments. There's certainly the opportunity with residential as well as industrial to build up. So instead of having one level building, perhaps we could have a 2-level industrial building. And for some of these smaller industrial, light types of industrial tenants, they only need a small unit. They could be accessed on the upper floor by a freight elevator or a ramp or something like that, and they want to be in an urban location. So why not have an industrial building where the ground floor is one type of perhaps a larger format industrial user,
Right.
and then upstairs, level 2, level 3, there's smaller unit industrial buildings.
Well, that is a good question. Why not? Why is it apparently so difficult to introduce that concept?
So part of it is that in the past, market rents were not high enough to support industrial building that was multi-level. The construction costs are quite a bit higher for multi-level industrial building, more complexities, land prices have gone up, and also there's the efficiencies of the industrial building to consider. Once you introduce a ramp and a freight elevator, it's no longer 100% efficient. So you put that together. Some places have poor soil conditions, for example, and there's challenges with parking. And then there's the regulatory process. So you say, well, we have this good idea. How could we get this approved if you're a developer and you own some land? And in some cases, there's a bit of a notion about industrial being historic ideas. It's sawmills, or it's steel manufacturing, or it's stinky or noisy or something like that. And that's valid for some uses, but not all. So there's certainly opportunity for industrial in the city. And then the second part, you look at some of the zoning bylaws from decades ago, and you say, well, do they allow higher density? They were written decades ago. Nobody thought there would be a multi-level industrial building. So when the bylaw was written, it was not at all considered. Now you say, well, do we need to remove a building height limitation in the old zoning bylaw? Could we change the allowable floor area ratio to allow higher density? Could we perhaps change the parking requirements to allow for more urban industry that's by transit?
Well, yeah. Now, because the vacancy rate is so low, you might very easily in council say, so what? Somebody else is going to take that space because there is demand. If I'm council or I live in a particular community, let's use North Vancouver for example, why would I care whether or not that sector stays in North Vancouver and can expand because there's going to be new supply that comes on? Like, what difference does it make to me as an individual and even as an elected representative?
Well, I think as a community, whether it's the staff at the municipal planning department or the council or just the general population, it's important to recognize there's a lot of jobs involved with this. And if the objective of a lot of municipal official community plans is to have a 1-to-1 ratio of jobs to workforce population, well, if the population is growing, then we should have more jobs within the same community. There may be property tax benefits. It's definitely worth noting that industrial lands pay a lot of property taxes compared to residential and other sectors. And then also there would be part of the complete community. Again, jobs are closer to where people work. There's opportunities for new employees or business expansion all within the community.
Well, I also think about the traffic choke points, which are the two bridges on and off of the North Shore. That must be a factor. And yet still, we're seeing that there is this long, slow process. How do we start to change the mindset of those people who can make a difference and move a project through to say this is important and it matters?
Well, as they say in planning school, a good land use plan is a good transportation plan. So those have to be considered together. So when we're talking about industrial uses, industrial intensification, the question is, well, where is the transportation infrastructure associated with that? Whether it is the airport, a port terminal, a rail yard, whether it's goods movement, rail truck route, or it's transit route. So where do we want to put the use that is close to that infrastructure, or if that infrastructure is being developed, where do we want to intensify beside it? And again, it's not necessarily getting the profile that it deserves, but I think over time and recently it's getting more attention.
Going back to the example of Calgary, it is a single city jurisdiction.
Yes.
They can say, well, out here in the northeast, we have room to grow. And you look at that area out there and you can see it expanding, and so much of it is doing exactly what we're talking about. In the Lower Mainland, we don't have that ability. Yes, we have Metro Vancouver that is taking on looking at this issue, but they really are not the 21 different jurisdictions that decide for themselves exactly how this is going to be applied. Is there a way that we can envision looking at this as a cohesive plan that all councils can say, we're going to buy into this?
Well, Metro Vancouver right now is working on a new regional industrial land strategy, and that is one input that's going to help them update the regional growth strategy, which was last prepared in 2011 and is going to be updated.
Right.
Now, I think it's important to recognize that we have to kind of work with the governance we have. There's 21, 22 municipalities, TransLink, other authorities in there. I don't expect that's going to change. The question is, well, what could, for any given topic, could we do effectively or efficiently? So you say, well, at the regional level, we have sewage, water, waste management, for example, and that's done most efficiently at the regional level. And I would say consideration of the economy, as well as industrial lands, as well as transportation, has to be done at the regional level. Whereas development permits for individual projects, for example, that's the jurisdiction of the municipality. What can be done about this? Again, more profile by industry associations, talking about it here today and further from that. Also, Metro Vancouver is looking at having a regional prosperity initiative, which might get more attention to this. But again, the decision makers need to have this at the top of their mind and say, well, there's an issue. We can't just talk about it some more. We need some action.
We have one other wrinkle in all of this, and that's the port. And the port touches on many of those same communities, but they are operating under a different jurisdiction, and they're in essence freezing out some of this land. Do they not need to be a part of this discussion, not just from their own needs, but from the entire region's needs?
Oh, for sure. The port should be part of it. They already are a part of it in terms of this process of updating the regional growth strategy as well as the regional strategy about industrial lands. And it's worth noting that the port is right in the process of updating their port land use plan. So everyone recognizes the challenges. Again, what is the role, let's say, or what should these different agencies be doing? And I think there's cooperation, there's opportunities for saying, well, there's need for port related lands, and some of those, depending on how one defines those, are those terminals, are those warehouses or distribution centers that also feed into those terminals? Is it import and export? What about goods that are manufactured locally and exported? What about goods that are consumed locally through e-commerce, which is a growing part of the industrial sector? So everyone has a role in a solution.
You know, I take a look from the residential side of the equation and look at what the Burrard lands with the Musqueam, Squamish, and I guess Tsleil-Waututh are all jointly involved in this. Will First Nations also play a role in helping to address this issue?
Well, certainly if you look at Tsawwassen First Nations, there is a lot of industrial development going on there.
They've already been moving in that direction.
They've been moving with that, a large commercial mall as well as industrial development, GWL, and I think it's important to recognize that's a good location relative to Roberts Bank Terminal 1, highway infrastructure, and other types of things. So there's an opportunity there. The approval process, that would be up to them to decide, and I believe it's actually long-term leases as they have.
Right. So when it comes to the approval process, what is the timeline that we're looking at?
Well, for industrial, it's a little shorter or a little bit more straightforward than residential development. I'm not going to say it's quick or it's easy, but often there's no rezoning required. So that is taking out one of the steps in terms of going to a certain level of public engagement, a public hearing, as well as council approval. So in cases where no rezoning is approved or required, then you're looking at a subdivision, you're looking at development permits, and then the usual engineering works and infrastructure upgrades as the case may be. How long that takes, that varies totally by the local situation. Some people will say it's too long, some people will say it's too quick. I would probably go on the angle of saying it could be a lot more shorter and efficient of a process in terms of the approval process in general. There's opportunities to expedite the approval process for all sectors.
You said rezoning generally isn't required, but if I want to go up rather than stay at the one level, historical level, rezoning then is required. And developers are now saying, and they're sitting on these properties in this opportunity and running into this process. How do we, or is there a way of moving around that?
So in some cases, they would require rezoning. What I would say is that municipalities should update their industrial zoning bylaws. So right now, for example, if there's a cap on the building height or a cap on the density, you would say, well, is that valid? Is there a good reason for that? And if there's no good reason, delete it. So take that out of the industrial zoning bylaw citywide. So all of a sudden that pre-zone or text amendment to the zone allows for industry to be higher density everywhere in your city, and individual developers don't have to fuss about that. There's no need for a rezoning. There's no need for a development variance permit. I would also suggest municipalities take a look at their allowable uses in their zoning bylaws. Again, industrial zoning from decades ago might have allowed sometimes rec centers, go-karts, doggy daycares, these other weird examples that we see. Do we really want to have those industrial areas? Do they take up space that could be otherwise better used for industrial purposes? And the flip side of that is updating it in terms of saying, well, there's new types of industry. There's e-commerce, there's research and development, there's new innovative types of industry that nobody thought about decades ago. The zoning bylaw ought to allow those in the right places.
Well, TV and video production as well.
Of course, including here in your suite.
Yeah, well, one of those kinds of facilities would be ideal for us, but they're hard to come by. So what happens if we don't start moving in a different direction? What are the consequences going to be if we don't address this issue?
I think it's a bit hard to quantify because it's opportunity costs or opportunities lost. So if we look at the vacancy rate is very low here, businesses that could expand here decide they can't, they go somewhere else. Is it possible to tally all that up? Very difficult to do. Where do they go? Where's the economic jobs and prosperity that leaves the region? Are there large North American or international businesses that say we want a location, a large site, industrial site in Vancouver? They look here, there's few opportunities. Instead of building it there, they go to Seattle, Calgary, perhaps Toronto, somewhere else. So again, we're looking at the opportunity that we're not jumping on and we're losing.
Well, I can't help but look at it and think, okay, finite land space. If we're not willing to go up and we can't go out, well, is this it?
Well, life will go on, but
yes,
perhaps.
But are we going? Can we realize our full potential as being a major port city on the west coast of North America if we can't start to address some of these issues?
I think we will be increasingly challenged. I know one of the things that Metro Vancouver might be doing is doing a regional land use assessment to see if there's lands within the region that are perhaps underutilized and could be repurposed to a different type of use to have more contribution to the economy or more jobs. Again, there's only a limited amount of land in the region. We have demands for industry, port, commercial, residential, agriculture. These are all legitimate uses that need a home. And the question is, well, given the amount of space that we have, how could we use the space and land more efficiently? And in some cases, it's building up. Some cases, it's more equipment, infrastructure, innovation of different sorts. And for example, some of the port lands, you can see the terminals, they have spent hundreds of millions of dollars to upgrade the performance of the terminals. And in the same footprints, they're now able to process 2 or 3 times the volume of goods.
Right.
That's a type of innovation and intensification.
And we need to turn our minds to that. And hopefully, because you've made this quite fascinating, more and more people will say, okay, I think that's an issue that we have to pay attention to. And then maybe it will be addressed.
I certainly hope it gets more profile. In fact, I just created a new website all about this, www.mvindustriallands.com. So all things industrial lands planning and development in the region.
I'll put that on the screen at this point in the video. Thank you for coming in and sharing this.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.